Hello, good morning. Welcome to the very first webinar on the market monitoring report, a report produced together by ACER and CEER. Today we are going to present the key findings on different volumes, electricity wholesale, gas wholesale, and also the new energy retail and consumer protection that is putting together what it used to be two volumes in the past. You can send your questions all through the presentations. First, I will give the floor to Christian Zinglersen, the director of ACER, and also the moderator of today's webinar. Through the different presentations, you can write on the chat the questions you have. We will group them through the presentations, and there will be a Q&A session just after the commission interventions, where we will try to solve all your questions on these three volumes that we have been producing and explain today. So without further ado, I give the floor to Christian, who will do the initial remarks and moderate the event. Good morning, Christian.
Yes, thanks a lot, David, and welcome to all those who have chosen to tune in Europe and possibly beyond Europe for this inaugural webinar of ACER and CEER on our market monitoring report for this year. We had the pleasure of briefly presenting some of the main conclusions yesterday for the European Parliament, for the ITRA committee. We were blessed, so to speak, with a lot of engaged, detailed questions, and we hope we can replicate that also this time, obviously benefiting from more time for this webinar than was possible in the presentation before the ITRA committee in the Parliament. And so we have, I think, roughly 40 minutes actually for the three volumes, gas wholesale, electricity wholesale, and retail markets and consumer protection. David was signaling a little bit how we would go about it. In a few minutes, we'll kick off, go through sort of the main headlines supported by several slides for each of the three volumes, starting with gas wholesale, which Bart Vereecke, who is the team leader up until recently for market monitoring on gas, now heads our strategy team at ACER. He will go through. Then electricity wholesale highlights will be presented by Rafa, who leads the market monitoring for electricity at ACER. And then the head of the Swedish National Regulatory Authority, Energimarknadsinspektionen, and Nilsson will present the third volume of retail markets and consumer protection. Then we have two colleagues from the European Commission, Florian Emakora and Jan Panek, who will give their views, their perspectives, if you will, on some of these findings, some of these highlights, how they relate to future EU policy challenges and priorities. They will have roughly 10 minutes for that. And then we have this Q&A round, which David was referring to. Now, don't hold back with posing your questions until the Q&A round. We won't address them until the Q&A round, but feel free to post them in the chat as David was outlining as you have them. We'll try to group them towards the end, maybe take a few on gas, electricity, retail markets in groups, and then we will try to take them at the end. We aim to have roughly 20 minutes for that. That may not be enough to tackle all questions, but we'll seek to go about it as best we can. And then we have Annegret Groebel, who is with the German National Regulatory Authority, Bundesnetzagentur, and president of CEER, who will draw some conclusions and close today's webinar. So that's what you have in store. We aim to let you go, so to speak, unless you let go first, a quarter to 12. Hopefully we will have not just an exciting enumeration of highlights for these three volumes this year, but also an opportunity to address some of your questions and comments to the extent time allows. With that, David, unless you want to add something here, I would be keen to pass the floor to kick us off to Bart. And Bart, you would take us through some of the key findings on gas wholesale markets on our behalf, followed by Rafa subsequently. So I pass you the floor, Bart, to kick us off. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Christian, for this introduction. I will guide you through the main findings of the gas wholesale piece. Of course, you will find more detail in the volume itself. I would also like to tell you that we have a 12-page leaflet summarizing all the points of the full MMR. So it's impossible to show everything in such a short time span, but I will try to do my best to give you the main things. So presentation today is unfortunately not complete to discuss a bit the impact of COVID on, among other energy markets. And here for gas, we see, of course, demand and prices have decreased. But interestingly, from the analysis so far, that's only first half of the year, price convergence levels have maintained, so they don't seem to have been impacted, which is a testimony of the fact that markets are quite resilient to shocks in the system. We'll see what brings later to us. So if I go to the next page to kick us off with some of the content, I want to really show this page on LNG. So the bars, they show that LNG landings have increased quite dramatically in 2019 and up to first half of 2020. This is very important because LNG as a marginal price setter in Europe for gas supply is now quite core to the price formation in gas markets and is expected to continue. So prices have decreased, and of course this is of course linked to evolutions in the international markets, and especially what's happening in East Asia. There's an interaction there in landings of LNG, whether they go to Asia or to us, and that of course is price specific. This is important, given that we are very dependent on gas that is imported. This page, this is the most complicated one, but I promise this will be the only one, so don't run away. Shows the supply status in Europe according to a couple of dimensions. The bubbles are number of sources that a country has where they can tap into gas. The horizontal axis is upstream market concentration, and on the left it means if you would not take into account a dominant source, how well you can still supply. There has been improvement over the years. You want to be in that blue box that I just indicated. Of course, these are estimates, but the number of countries or markets is increasing over time. So they're already quite a good number. Main challenge still is the concentration. So even though overall dependency is decreasing, we still have some concentration challenges. And then if we aggregate at EU level, we see that there has been improvement. Sources, also concentration levels have decreased, but there is still some way. But it's a good setting for markets to thrive in already. Of course, as a result, we always like to show this slide because it shows the supply sourcing cost, also estimates, of course. Here, the market's prices have been converging over time. They have dropped quite a lot, as you can see. On the top, we take TTF as the benchmark. The yellow has been expanding a lot. The core thing here is that if I look at an annual piece, which 2019, the price decreases were quite sudden and quick, and then the more mature markets in Northwest Europe could tap into that more quickly, and others became a bit more bluish again, but we expect that they can tap into that later. There is some more long-term contracts that these markets have, so it takes a bit more time before market events take control or have an impact across the board. But overall, positive evolution also at hub level. I'm not showing you charts here, but it's the convergence is quite high, especially in Northwest European hubs, where up to 90% of the time the delta or the spread is less than €1 per megawatt hour. And then we have some differences across the hubs with a bit lower convergence levels, regional differences for various reasons, but it really is also a positive indication, which makes us moving into the next page. I lost control over the slide, or it doesn't shift, and now it does. Sorry for that. The hubs, the gas hubs, we always do a ranking of them based mainly on REMIT data. REMIT is a database where all transactions are being recorded in a confidential matter, so we sanitize this to a large degree, and it's based around 10 to 15 metrics. And then we rank. It's of course not pure science, but we see that over time we have more and more advanced hubs, a couple of well-established ones. There is still, of course, work to be done in terms of improvements. The delta between weaker performance and better performance is actually, unfortunately, increasing. So it will take some effort to get those hubs, mainly in Southeast Europe, going. But in general, for 2019, differences versus 2018, NBP continues to decline a bit, also taking the Belgian hub in its course, given that they are very linked. Spain, Hungary, and were very performing well, and in general, all markets went ahead except for some of those that I mentioned. So as a conclusion, market rules are working well across Europe, more or less. There are differences, of course, but in 3/4 of the consumption, we can see good market functioning, and there is advancement in the others. There are still welfare benefits to be tapped into, of course, but that is a matter, hopefully, of time. On the next page, I show the network codes. No, I have still another one, sorry. TTF. This is the leading hub in the EU. There is no discussion about that. It's the European hub of reference. And it's also attracting more and more forward liquidity from other hubs when we look at these individual metrics that we analyze. So, and on top of that, globally speaking, just like Henry Hub in North America, it's also becoming a global reference hub for hedging, mainly of LNG. So the scales are, of course, adapted because TTF is so important that we have to change a bit the scales, otherwise some would not be visible anymore. This is very key to the dynamics in the EU. On the network codes, these are rules that are supporting actually the gas markets. They are bringing a value add to the system. We see positive benefits. For example, balancing has become more market driven. The TSOs have a lower role. Also, the transparency rules for tariffs, they make it easier for shippers to enter into the market. And then on capacity, we see that the more flexible use of the network allocation is also bringing benefits, and I want to show you that in the next page. This is on the left, you see ex post situation, and on the right, an ex ante situation. So the dark blue are legacy contracts, which are over time expiring, and they are being replaced via new capacity allocations in line with the regulation. And we see that to a large degree, they have been replaced so far. remains to be seen if that will be in the future as well. They are replaced by shorter term, like within day ahead, month ahead products. So it gives, so players are reacting to the possibilities and they are aligning to what they need. It gives them more opportunities to do so. On the right, we have analyzed the expiration calendar of the long-term legacy contracts, and you see the way in which they will expire. So by 2028, many will be no longer in place. It remains to be seen to what extent they will be replaced, probably not all. This might raise some questions about stranded assets for TSOs. And we also see that on longer term bookings, so yearly ahead, longer term, we see a larger role of or an interest of upstreamers. So it's a very interesting analysis to be sharing with you. Now, when we look forward in the EU, we have decided to move to a carbon neutral system by 2050. That means also that there is an important task to move to make gas carbon free. Even though there has been advances over the last decade, as you can see, the relative share of consumption is still relatively small. So that means there's still quite some work to be done. Prices, of course, of low carbon are not competitive yet, but overall, when we want to move to this more carbon neutral system, we would like to see that the more or less successful system that we have is taken into account or kept to a large extent, and that new rules are embedded in that kind of system, so that we, as the Americans say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's also a role for hydrogen, and then some colleagues of us in infrastructure have made a survey on where we stand. So we are only at the beginning. 35% allow blending. There are strategies being produced, but we are still at the start of what could become a bigger thing to reach those targets. Now, this was my last page. I would like to give the floor to Rafa, who will discuss the electricity wholesale status. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart. I hope you can hear me well. So I'll guide you now through the part of electricity wholesale. I'll try to follow a similar structure as Bart. I will start by highlighting some of the most recent developments, in particular in view of the impact of COVID-19. Then I'll highlight some aspects on which we have observed more progress over the last few years, in particular in 2019, and then I'll move to highlight what are the main remaining challenges before moving to conclusions towards the end of the presentation. I'll try to go to next slide. Yeah. So in terms of the impacts of COVID, well, as in gas, COVID has impacted the markets in many different ways. The most obvious one is decrease of demand, together with an important shift in the generation mix, and consequently a drop in prices. This drop in prices was at times very pronounced. So it was on average around 30% during the first semester of 2020, and in some areas it reached 80%, just to give you an idea of the dimension of the drop, together with the occurrence of some negative prices. A positive development that we have observed, or at least a kind of a successful test, is that during this period, TSOs coped with high levels of penetration of renewables coupled with low demand, and in occasions very few thermal generation units connected, and it proved to be successful in terms of managing the system, which can be considered as a positive test for what can be expected more and more in the future. I will move to next slide. Yeah. We can actually illustrate graphically these changes, in particular the relevant switch in the power mix. On the one hand, already in 2019, there was a switch from coal to gas, and also from coal to wind and solar, which was above the production with coal. And even more remarkably, during the first semester of 2020, there was the first ever fossil fuels to renewables switch. So this was an important highlight of the first semester of 2020, which may be more frequent in the future, depending, of course, on the evolution also of the COVID. But in any case, it's expected to happen more and more in the years to come. If I have to answer now in next slide, the question on whether COVID had decelerated or had impacted the market integration process, I would say that in principle, we have not seen such a concern. On the contrary, we have observed a number of good developments. For example, in intraday markets, I'm trying to show, it seems to go a little bit slow. Okay, here it is. We've seen, even compared to the previous year and compared to the year before, we have seen a steady increase in the volumes of intraday through single market coupling, both in terms of volumes, but also in the level of cross-zonal exchange in this time frame. So this illustrates with an example that the market integration process is continuing at pace, despite, of course, the disruptions of the pandemic. I will now move to, well, in particular, to show what are the main progress that we have observed in 2019 and also in recent years. So this is a hopefully dynamic animated chart, at least for me it is, hopefully for the audience as well, where you have observed how market coupling has extended both for day-ahead and intraday to a large majority of countries in Europe. And this came together with an increase in the efficient use of cross-zonal capacity in the both time frames. In this respect, it is good to make a remark that there is a reason for concern with regards to the completion of the day-ahead market coupling, in particular, given the delays that have been observed in the implementation of flow-based, which has been delayed for a number of in a number of occasions, and it's a recurring delay, together with the final integration of the coexisting market coupling projects. This is one of the areas of concern that we want to highlight, and there is an urgent need to finalize such a project. Hopefully I can. Yeah. Apologize for the slight delay. There seems to be a small time lag. So I. Yeah. Maybe equally relevant, or as a summary of all what was said in previous slide, we can illustrate with one single chart what is the actual achievement or the actual level of efficiency in the use of the interconnectors across the different timeframes. We track it every year, and the chart represents the level of efficient use in the day-ahead, intraday, and balancing. And as mentioned in the slide, while in day-ahead and intraday, there has been significant progress. In balancing, there is still quite significant room for improvement, which is, on the other hand, understandable given that we are still in the early implementation of the balancing time frame, and it is expected that with the establishment of the different platforms following the approval of a number of methodologies by the agency, so now TSOs are working on the process to make it happen and to also increase the level of exchange and the efficient use of capacity, first to finalize the ahead intraday, but also in the balancing time frame where it is still starting. I would like now to start sharing a number of challenges that we bring every year to the report, just to highlight what could be the main barriers or the main aspects that require improvement. A first obvious one that is well known to the audience, possibly, is the identification of the insufficient cross-zonal capacity, leading to set the minimum target of 70% in the clean energy package. In this respect, I would like to start first with sort of good an improvement, which is illustrated with this example in Central West Europe. I would spare from the technical details because the chart is a bit technical, but in essence, it represents an improvement towards the achievement of the 70%, which is still modest, but still is a step in the right direction. It also implies that there is quite still significant room for improvement, but some steps taken in this region came with an improvement. So what is the agency doing with regards to the 70%? Even if it is not our remit to ensure the enforcement of the 70% capacity target, we are working intensively to produce a dedicated report on the topic. It's a complex matter because it requires to analyze massive amount of information. But our intention here is to be able to produce a report which presents a complex matter in a simplified manner, but at the same time given sufficient level of detail for stakeholders, for member states to understand where they are with respect to the 70% fulfillment, which of course can be complemented as it cannot be otherwise by other follow-up or monitoring tasks that also NRAs and TSOs do. But our main added value here probably is to be able to provide a harmonized framework or a harmonized approach to monitoring the 70% target, and we intend to publish a report on this covering the first semester of this year towards the end of December. Yeah. In this context of the 70% target, it's always good to remind that in light of the clean energy package, member states and TSOs have a portfolio of instruments, of routes to meet the 70% target. On the one hand, TSOs can, or member states can apply the most obvious or an always ongoing solution, which is of course to invest in network. But this needs to be complemented with other solutions. First, because investments need to be cost efficient, so it cannot be the only solution. Then because network investments in occasions, we have seen it in the past and still now, face certain delays for various reasons. So TSOs may apply in the short term remedial actions, such as redispatching, for example, and then alternatively, they can also improve the configuration of the bidding zones. This is in addition to the possibility envisaged in the clean energy package, as the audience may well know, of certain transitory measures, such as the application of action plans or derogations during a certain period. I'm trying, yeah. This is just to highlight that the agency is currently involved in most of, or if not all this process in different manners, mostly with regards to either monitoring in the case of projects of common interest, or for example, by approving a number of methodologies related to cross-border redispatch or the methodology to be applied for the bidding zone review process. With regards to these two elements, on the one hand, the application of redispatch, what we have seen is that is key and is necessary, but at the same time is challenging in terms of, on the one hand, approval of the methodologies, adoption of the methodologies, but also its effective implementation, which I may summarize as being in a relatively fragile territory, which if is not well implemented or effectively implemented in the way we think or the clean energy package envisaged to be, it may well be that actually the bidding zone review process may have to play a role to address the existent congestions. In this respect, with regards to the bidding zone review process, we also want to clarify that the role of the agency is essentially to approve the methodology, but it's fully acknowledged that the study is going to be performed by TSOs themselves, and the final decision of whether to maintain or not bidding zones lies on member states. In this respect of just to bring a little bit of more monitoring to the slides, in terms of the bidding zone review, we made an analysis of some of the effects of one of the or the recent split of the formerly merged German, Luxembourg, and Austria bidding zone into 2 bidding zones. Here we have observed, on the one hand, some positive effects, which still need to consolidate and will consolidate more in the future, including with the implementation of flow-based, which will help to collect more benefits from this split, possibly. On the one hand, we observed certain increase of capacity on some of the Austrian borders, connected to a decreasing uncertainty in capacity calculation and lower amount of loop flows. And it was also observed some increase in day-ahead markets liquidity compared to the year before. Here I would like to make a remark that the analysis of day-ahead market liquidity was after correcting the figures sufficiently well to avoid certain double counting that could occur if the numbers are not considered carefully. We also looked into forward markets or the evolution of forward markets liquidity, and here the picture is mixed and is not as positive only as in the previous slide. On the one hand, we observed relatively good development or reasonable development with regards to German forward markets liquidity, which seemed to inherited the high liquidity of the former big bidding zone, large bidding zone. And as you can see, is this transition from the blue to the green to the green area in this chart. However, in the case of Austria, the liquidity remains at much lower levels, even though we observe a certain increase in the most recent dates. This is illustrated here by the bid-ask spreads, which show like while for Germany, bid-ask spreads are low and as low as they were before for the large bidding zone. For Austria, the starting point was actually a relatively high or quite high bid-ask spread, though, as I mentioned, it is observed an improvement that could actually be comparable to liquidity, to the levels of liquidity in other markets. But of course, this improvement, if such, needs to be observed or tracked further over time. I will now move to one of the other final challenge that we always report in our in our volume on electricity wholesale, and it refers to the need to improve coordination in the area of adequacy. We fully acknowledge the legitimate interest of member states of preserving, safeguarding security of supply. At the same time, we observe that there is still room for further coordination in this area, in particular when it comes to adequacy assessments. And here one area that we have tracked over the last few years is consistently there seems to be some discrepancy, not everywhere, but in some cases between the adequacy assessments and the implementation of capacity mechanisms. We do this analysis based on the math analysis of ENSOI, which now will be improved or will evolve towards a pan-European adequacy assessment, which will play a relevant role in that respect, and it will take place next year for the first time. Just to emphasize that here we are aligned with the EU objectives in the area of security of supply, once more acknowledging the role of member states to safeguard security, but also highlighting the possibility of grasping or collecting benefits from more coordination and mutual reliance in this area. Maybe to conclude, so just a number of high-level conclusions and recommendations. So on the one hand, we have seen that electricity markets are key for a number of political objectives, including the internal energy market itself, but also the objective of decarbonization at the lowest possible cost. We see that progress has been made, but there is still, or we are still far from finalizing the fully integrated electricity market. We also want to highlight the need of keeping the focus on network codes and clean energy package implementation, and actually even emphasizing the need for an effective implementation. So as we usually say, not only tick the box, that is not only things are done, but things should be done effectively and efficiently to improve market functioning and market integration. As highlighted, one of the main areas of concern is the urgent need to finalize the flow-based market coupling project together with the integration of the various market coupling projects that still coexist. And in the area of security of supply, as I have just said, to perform robust adequacy assessments and strive to ensure improved price signals before resorting to capacity markets. Maybe a final slide, which is a bit of advertisement, but also a forward-looking information. We are working, and this applies in general to all volumes, not only to electricity, but also to gas, possibly to the retail sections, to enlarge the scope of our activities, to touch upon other topics that possibly we have not done so thoroughly in the past. First, we also want to mention, as it was already highlighted before, that we'll publish soon a standalone report on the share of cross-zonal capacity towards meeting the 70% target. This will happen in December this year. It will be our first report, followed by regular monitoring on this area. And over time, we intend progressively to incorporate a number of new topics that are mostly the reflection on the one hand of aspects that are in the clean energy package, but also the possibility to do more horizontal analysis, including relationship between electricity and gas wholesale markets, and also enhancing the retail market monitoring. As I finish with retail market, I think it's an excellent phrase to give the floor to Anne, who will take over for the next part of the slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafa. And yes, I'm very pleased to be able to present some of the main findings in the retail and the consumer protection volume. And it's actually the first time we have a consolidated version, both for retail and consumer protection. And I think that's good because this is the two sides of the same coin. And as you have already understand the other volumes as well, of course, this is based on 2019 data. So we don't have yet seen the impact of the clean energy package implementation. There is a lot of new rules coming in there, and we don't see the full impact of the COVID-19 either. But just to give you, oops, I was a bit too fast. Some findings, at least, we have in the report regarding the COVID-19 situation. And we see that NRAs have taken some measures to be ordered to both protect consumers, but also, of course, to protect suppliers in this crisis. And for consumers, the focus has mainly been to avoid disconnection. And for suppliers, of course, we don't want them to go bust. So there has been measures taken in some member states to mitigate the short-term cash flow challenges. But of course, we have a very diverse situation throughout Europe, and we haven't seen sort of the full, sort of the end of this yet. So we will continue, of course, to monitor this. Moving in then to electricity and looking at prices, we see a large variation of prices throughout Europe. And we have seen, if we speak more generally, we have seen both for household consumers, but also for industrial users, we have actually seen a slight increase in prices compared to 2018. But there is a big difference throughout Europe. For households, for example, we have the highest prices in Germany, 28.8 euro cents per kilowatt hour. And that's a big difference compared to Bulgaria, where household consumers only pay 9.8 euro cents per kilowatt hours. And we have even greater variation if we look at the industrial market. On average, industrial consumers pay the most in Denmark, 22.2 euro cents per kilowatt hour, compared to Luxembourg, where it was the cheapest, 4.9 euro cents per kilowatt hour. And we also have the energy contracting parties in the report. I didn't say that, but we also have here some comparison in relation to them. Nothing is happening when I'm trying to move. Okay, here we go. Here we go on gas. Moving on to gas then. Gas prices actually increased for household consumers, but decreased for industrial users during 2018. But also here we see a large variation throughout the Union. The highest price was paid in my country, Sweden, 11.8 euro cents per kilowatt hour. And that's almost 3 times as high as the households paid in Romania, 3.4 euro cents per kilowatt hour. And the industrial market, we also see a big difference. Denmark has the highest price, while the consumers in France, not the consumers, but the industrial consumers, they have the lowest price. And the energy contracting parties, they paid, household consumers paid on average 2.15, and industrial paid 3.8 euro cents. So it's a bit, so it's different there compared to the EU. To understand the competitiveness of retail markets, it's of course very important to understand how well they are mirroring the wholesale markets. And we see, of course, that there is a link between the wholesale and retail, and that's good. But there is also some features in the retail markets that sort of indicates the market is maybe not working super good. What we see is that there is a gap, of course, between the ones. That is something we call the markup. And the gap actually widens when prices goes down, and sort of becomes more narrow when prices go up. So it sort of the retail market is more responsive when prices go up compared to when prices go down. So up like a rocket and down like a feather. This is nothing unusual for markets, but still this is, and it's a bit worrying. If you look at gas there, you see that the gap is actually, it's going, they're going in the opposite direction. And the differences, if you compare 2019 with 2018, I think the gap has actually widened. That goes for both electricity and for gas. What we can see is also that the contestable part of what the consumers pay, the energy price, the contestable part actually goes down, and that's a trend that has been for many years now. And I think if you compare 2008 with 2019, there is the contestable part has actually fell 9.4%. So a 9.4% decrease. What we see is also, of course, that subsidies and levies for renewables is increasing if we look at electricity. If we look at gas, we see that network charges has increased compared to 2012. The bill is, of course, an important vehicle for consumers, not only to be able to find out what they have to pay, but also to get other information. And here you see that there is a large amount of information in the bills in Europe. This differs, of course, a lot. Billing cycles differ, but also what's in the bill actually differs. But it is, of course, important here that as the bill is a tool for the customers in order to find out if they can gain something to, for example, change supplier, it is important that they are not overwhelming consumers, that consumers can make good use of the information. And it would be, of course, interesting to follow the implementation of the clean energy package here. We have data for next year, and we have much more rules on bills in the clean energy package. So moving on to sort of retail market functioning, and it's a bit disappointing. I think that overall we can say that the markets are not developing fast enough, or towards more well-functioning markets fast enough. We have some, though still we have some sort of good signs. The average number of nationwide suppliers actually increased in 2019, and this has been the trend now for some years, but it is going quite slow. Market concentration levels also have improved, but slowly, and of course it differs a lot also here. Some member states have very high concentration ratios, while others have quite a lot of suppliers and quite good sort of quite well functioning and quite good competitive pressure on the resale market. And of course, price intervention is something that is hampering both participation of customers, but of course also it creates barriers to entry. And of course, if we have price interventions that goes below cost, that creates a huge hurdle. And in those member states, we don't see any movement when it comes to newcomers entering into the market. Of course, here in relation to the price interventions, we will, of course, it will be interesting to monitor the impact of the clean energy package. Price comparison tool is something important for customers because it reduces search costs for customers, and they will be able to find out if they can change, if they can benefit from switching suppliers. It's a very good thing. And here you see this on the screen, you see that almost all countries have comparison tools, at least one when it comes to electricity. Not that many when it comes to gas, but and you see that in some member states there are a lot of comparison tools. I guess they are commercial ones, but there are also ones that is run by the NRAs. So this is an area, of course, that we will follow also in the future. There are new rules also in the clean energy package here as well. Oops. Smart meter rollout is, of course, something very important. It's important if you want to know how much you consume, but of course also if you want to move into the next step, being able to become more even more active than just changing suppliers, moving into areas as maybe responding to dynamic pricing hour by hour, or a demand side response scheme, or becoming a prosumer. Here the smart meter is a key, and there is an ongoing rollout, of course, but it may be not that fast. You see on the figure here that there are some countries where the rollout is completed, while in some countries nothing actually has happened. So it varies a lot here as well. It's of course important that consumers can be protected and not be disconnected. And here we don't see any big movement compared to last year we measured 2018. But energy poverty is of course a problem in some member states, and not very many countries have actually defined this officially. So we will see, of course, here also with new rules what will happen. And also, of course, the COVID crisis and the impact here will also be interesting to follow. But for 2019, we have pretty much the same data and the same numbers of disconnection as previous year. Finally, consumer protection it's also very important, of course, that you can complain if you are not satisfied, and European consumers file a lot of complaints, of course, to their suppliers and to their DSOs, Not so many are registered by the NRAs or by the ombudsman or alternate dispute resolution mechanisms. But if we still have some data, and you can see that the number one is complaining about your bill or your invoice, and the second most common is complaining about metering.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Then I would maybe pass the floor for some concluding remarks from Annegret, regretting, of course, we did not have time to hear from Florian and Jan, in part due to technical difficulties. We'll evaluate a little bit on that for upcoming occasions, but I pass the floor to you, Annegret, a few minutes later than I had expected, but hopefully you can wrap this up somehow with some concluding insights, also building on these very many questions that we had. Over to you.
Yes, indeed. Okay, thank you, Christian, and no problem. Indeed, I think the question showed how relevant all the market monitoring is in all respect, with all the different elements and aspects of it on the wholesale level, on the retail level, on the consumer side, on electricity side, gas side. And also it showed the interaction and the relevance with regard to the framework, and in particular, as we heard, COVID, the impact of COVID, I think, was limited because markets in their current, based on the framework, on a sound framework, worked well. And of course, we have seen that more is to be done for the integration of the national markets into a more integrated internal energy market. That is one integration. The second integration surely is increasing share of renewables to be integrated in an efficient way, and in the grid as well as in the markets. And it was mentioned several times that we see that prices are reacting, which is a good sign. Of course, negative prices indicate that there is abundance, and that was a consequence of the decrease in demand during COVID times. But however, that is, and that also then had implications on the other market side. The share of renewables increased. So I think, again, the market is functioning, but we also see that the instruments laid out in the clean energy package need to kick in to ensure that the mechanisms become better, and the barriers that still exist are reduced. With this, I come to the, let's say, third integration, that is the integration of an active consumer in the market, in the retail market, but also, let's say, speaking more broadly in the system, to ensure that we are not seeing anymore this, let's say, split or between wholesale market developments, where we see the development is working well as it should, also with the implementation of network codes, etc., market coupling, albeit still we have still to go away. But not all the benefits of this positive developments are trickling down to, or are passed through to consumers. And that is something which is of concern, as Anne has pointed out, where hopefully the instruments of the clean energy package with regard to consumers and retail market becoming more powerful, becoming more active, being more integrated into the system, will not only have positive effects for the system as a whole, but will, of course, hopefully also bring benefits to the consumers from the energy transition. And I think that is something that we have to see as a whole system approach, so to speak, to ensure that consumers buy in because they see the benefits of, for example, becoming more active when we have let's say the technology like more smart meters, etc., better functioning of the rules of the system, more transparency for consumers. We have seen the price comparison tools as an instrument which is fostered by the clean energy provisions, but also generally the better information regarding the energy bill, all elements that can make sure that consumers and customers can take an informed choice if they see the benefits. And I think that is very, very important. And again, this is related to a proper market functioning throughout the whole value chain, so throughout all levels of the markets. And I think that is something which we have to bear in mind when implementing the new instruments. And I also would like to mention that it is important that the instruments that we have now new, as was pointed out, the 70% target and others, need to be, let's say, implemented soon and fit in and be based on the foundations of the existing market design in order to avoid fragmentation or even a sort of backlash, as was pointed out, for example, in the questions related to the gas market situation, where we cannot be sure it develops in the right direction. And we also saw in the development of retail prices that the gap sometimes between wholesale and retail is increasing. And that, of course, is a sign of concern, which shows that there are existing barriers which we need to overcome by swiftly implementing the new provisions and fitting it together so that the system as a whole can be, let's say, a tool also, or a way forward to ensure decarbonization at least cost, and to ensure also that consumers are not left behind and that they are included. So for us, the principle of inclusiveness in that context is very important. But a fundamental part is that the market system needs to function, and the instruments that are there to make the market system better functioning, also cross-border capacity market mechanisms, so etc. All of this is an important element, because the best, let's say, way in the end is to have an integrated, stable system based on functioning markets. And I think the value of these principles of market of the internal energy market legislation and the clean energy package have proven its value during COVID crisis. And I think we need now to look ahead with regard, and that was mentioned as well, to the further development of the 10E regulation, looking at energy efficient investment, infrastructure investment, and of course also, let's say, ensuring that there are sustainable and green projects of common interest. So linking it with the overall objectives of the Commission of a decarbonization at least cost, that of course also relates to the gas side. Plus, of course, let's say overall the objective of becoming climate neutral, carbon neutral by 2050, and now let's say also increasing the climate targets as proposed. And we are aware, I think we should, and that may be the last concluding sentence, we as regulators should be aware that this is absolutely necessary, but that of course tightening up of the targets here requires more efforts from all of us, so from energy operators, generators, and regulators, and of course also the broader politics to ensure it works together, and we can, let's say, make jointly this effort to ensure that the energy transition and the transition towards a climate and carbon neutral economy as a whole is managed well and achieved in time as envisaged. So I think that's what I want how I try to conclude on this very, very interesting and broad discussion, as well as, of course, on the reporting as such, showing these effects. And I think what we also had seen this time is the importance of monitoring for these future legislative developments. So to enable to give the Commission something at hand for an evidence-based proposals. I think that is a relevant part of the work of market monitoring. So not only backward looking, but also making use of it in a forward looking manner. Thanks. Back to you, Christian.
Thanks a lot, Annegret. And yeah, you actually stole one of my very concluding remarks, which I completely agree with what you said. No, it's very good. I want to thank everyone for being with us. We hit the noon mark. It's a bit later than we had sort of promised, but I see that some of you have chosen to stick around, roughly 200 of you. We appreciate that a lot. Thank you for being with us. I hope you agree a bit in the same spirit as Annegret was concluding with, that market monitoring remains as, if not more important than ever, also as we embark upon this new and exciting, to some extent challenging phase of energy market developments in Europe. We tried to tackle as many questions as possible. I don't think we got around to every single one. I apologize for that. I think we got maybe 75, 80% of the questions in 6 or 7 rounds. Hopefully you'll forgive that. That was sort of the silver lining of the EC colleagues not being able to join us, because we managed to tackle more questions. But of course, that was a bit unfortunate, and we'll seek next time to make sure that they are involved in a way so that they can give their views. I know many of you would have been looking forward to that. There's lots of information available on our respective websites, obviously the reports, snapshot summaries, etc. This recording will be made available, the slides will be made available, so there is lots of stuff to dive into if these roughly hour and a half have not, shall we say, fully satisfied your appetite so far. So with that, thank you very much for joining. David, if you have any final words to say, by all means say it. Other than that, I wish you a good noon, afternoon, maybe even lunch if you're lucky enough. Thank you very much for being with us.